Andile, welcome to Design and Dialogue.
Thanks, Glenn, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
Fantastic to have you. Just to repeat Lucy's introduction there, please put your questions for Andile in the chat box and we'll get back to them at the end of the conversation. We have a lot to show you first. Incredible images of Andile's work, not only the recent iThongo project that he's been working on, which I know we're all very eager to talk about. It's really the first time it's been presented in public, but also we'll be looking at some of your earlier work. So first, Andile, can I please ask you to introduce yourself?
All right. Yes, thank you. So I'm gonna explain my introduction first because it's an important part of when you meet someone, which is you introduce yourself, and so as your lineage, your father and your mother's side, and as far as you can remember, but we'll save that because of the time. But so when I introduce myself, my full name is Andile Dyalvane, that's my surname. Ujola, that's the clan name. Panko Mukenge, umzwane kwakwa. And Zalongo Ngolanga, Ngokudu, Ngokuboni. So that's my mother's side. So I'll leave it at that. But where I come from, I am from the Eastern Cape in South Africa, and in a small village called Ngobozana. This beautiful landscape, Amatola Mountains, that's what we call them. And that's where I grew up. I went to school, and that's where basically most of my rite of passage and some of my milestones growing up, I started there. So that's home. That is my home.
Yeah. And home will be a very important word in our conversation this morning, or indeed this afternoon for you. But of course, you're right now in Cape Town,
Yes.
in the city, so that's where you're beaming in from. And I understand that you have some family visiting, and of course, you have this big exhibition happening at Southern Guild. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging Southern Guild Gallery and their help in putting us this program together today, and of course, the exhibition itself. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Andile, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and start plunging into images because we have, as I said, we have so much to see. And we're going to first go all the way back to 2016. And this is, of course, an exhibition at Friedman Benda Gallery, which, of course, presents this program, Design and Dialogue. So we're going to go through fairly quickly, and occasionally we'll pause to rest on an image and talk about it in greater depth. But as we first start looking at these pictures, I wonder if you could say a little bit about your background and how you came to the medium of ceramics and to the project of sculpture more generally.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a while. I think the first time I actually professionally, so to say, touched clay or introduced to clay was 1996. That's professionally, but before that, having been grown up in the Eastern Cape in the countryside, so I grew up as one, you would call it a farmer, or a head boy, the one that is a shepherd. But those were my duties, and you've got livestock, you've got the land, you've got everything that brings you that sort of, as a child, that would be assigned to you as a chore. And now during that time, this is the time where in the river as boys, while the goats and the animals are grazing, so you will find time to go and dig clay. And that's the child play, and it's ideally you shouldn't be doing that as a child because your job is to do A, B, and C, not the playing with clay. So, but I had found myself drawn into this, medium and fascinated with how the clay is formed and the fossilized objects and whatnot. So, without knowing the technology of firing it, or even seeing anyone making objects, artifacts, or pots, if you may. And I will leave these things in the river or anywhere, and then they will just crumble back down by the weather. But only 95, really, I had, when I enrolled at the art college. And why I enrolled there also was because I used to like doodling a lot at school because there was no art subject. Okay, and so I would be in trouble again because, that was not supposed to be done. While the teacher is teaching me, then I get bored with the subjects. And then I'll start doodling, and I couldn't help myself, right? But then I remember growing up, in fact, the brother that I just went first to the airport, he was quite a good illustrator himself as well. But, times at that time in South Africa were not conducive for him to really follow that career. he needed to deal with other things. But in any case, so having seen him and seen some illustration in the books, I thought I would be being an artist, and assuming that I would just sit in a desk and draw. But that's all I know. Even the teachers, they have no guidance or idea of art. So that's very important to note. And then only then when I got to Cape Town, 1995, when I graduated my grade 12, I think you guys call it an entry level to university or college. Yeah. And so I then met this one friend of my brother who was staying in these hostels. Hostels basically are these projects where the men, they called migrant workers, would stay in the city from the countryside and stay in these long train-like structures. So my father used to stay in one of these as well. So I then moved to Cape Town in hoping that either I'll get a job or go to school. Now, what I did then, I was introduced to this friend of my brother, who then led me to enroll at this art college. And this is very important to note because, again, I had no idea what art was. I thought I was just sit and draw. I went to the art college, and then they wanted to know my portfolio. And I had no idea what that was because word of English, you know, I was always speaking because I've never spoken English. So I had no idea what that means. But then they tried to bring it down to my level as to say, have you done any artwork before? And I was like, yeah, you could have just said that. So I had this small book, you know, had not this one, but this small book that had all these illustrations I was doing. And then I showed them, they were like, wow, you're talented. And that's basically how it started. So they took us in a field trip that week and to the museums, galleries, and all sorts of things. Remember, I'm still a young boy from the village who still got mud and cow dung in the feet. So that's like, the city is so big and it's intense. So when I realized what art was or what the subject I was getting to, I was like, wow, I cannot believe they're going to let me play for the whole 3 years every day because that's a child play. So I'm going to be drawing, I'm going to be doodling, I'm going to be playing with clay just all this time. So that's how it started without knowing that I would end up being, I guess, talking to the audience all over the world right now.
Yeah, amazing. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to observe already in the pictures we're seeing that drawing is still very important for you. And later on, we'll see some sketches that you make before making the ceramic pieces as you work through the ideas. But I wanted to ask you about the language of ornament or decoration or articulation, might be a better word, of the surfaces of the ceramic. Because it seems to me that although abstract, it also has some very deep resonance, both culturally and personally. So I wonder if you could talk about the way that you use the surface of the objects as a kind of canvas for the language of the artwork.
Yes, that's a good one. Thanks, Ken. Because you see, the way that I think I was taught, even without being taught the language of art, but to look and observe and listen, that was very key. Like from my uncle and my father and my aunt and my aunt, they would teach how they would teach you the oral education and being like an apprentice. This herb is used for this. Look out for this plant and this structure in this park. So you can imagine. So your mind is working in that sense. So that has to do also with your experience within the community or any other place. So you observe, and then as an artistic person or a person who's an artist, so you process this information, and then you found an outlet to let that out. So, you know, over time as I'm progressing in my work, I remember my earlier work, which we don't even have here, when I just moved from Cape Town, from the Eastern Cape to Cape Town, was very colorful with beautiful flowers and flora and fauna, and the landscape was reflecting where I was just being. And slowly growing into now understanding a bit of my culture and exposed to some of the artifacts that I did not grow up with, but having seen them in art history, in the museum, in galleries, in some collections, in thrift shops. So I started getting so closer to those artifacts, and I guess the energy of the users and the makers I was drawn to because it's part of my ancestry as well. So and that was very key. So if you're looking at some of the images that we're looking at now, for instance, you see this cutting motif, which is I pay homage to this body scarification. So that's something that I grew up practicing or experiencing in my home, in my neighborhood, in my village, and so as wild deer in other tribes in Africa. But why it came to be so strong as a way of a signature in my work was because of the fact that, because of the Western influences that come into our cultures, it's a culture that is the ritual that is dying out. So for me as an artist, I found that it's my duty to use my platform and my skills and my gift to document and create conversation in letting the next generation or the viewer know what these practices were for healing purposes, for marking, a certain stage of one's life in many levels, and certain kind of hierarchies and clean identification. And just, it's about identity as well. So it's a way of documenting. So for me, this is the language of the surface itself with the forms and the colors themselves. They speak, they're very intentional. Let's put it that way, yeah.
Yeah. And what about the practice of vessel making specifically? So we've talked about the way that you're articulating the object, and scarification is such an important example of this, the repository that you're bringing to the work. But I wonder if either in ceramics or other forms of vessel making, other materials, whether that's also an important source for you.
Yes, indeed. I will say this in this manner because I'm gonna give credit to one of my lecturers, Mishek Masuku, who's still alive, who's one of the teachers that taught me vessel making, basically like throwing on the potter's wheel and coiling, and many others that I've come across with. It's the vessel making, really, it's based on my orientation in terms of when I was starting pottery. They sort of introduced us in the pinch pot to understand the material to start with, but also in explaining that vessels themselves are a very important part of our culture, not only the African culture, but people from way back in terms of storage vessels, carrying water, cooking, drinking, and so on, and preserving preserving foods and so on, and medicines as well. So for me, it's something that it's always been part of what I'm doing, and even the process and technique of making, specifically coiling. I mean, we're probably gonna get to that, but it's very important. Any shape that you see in front of you right now, it was created by coiling in a round manner, but then formed. But it's all based on the practice that I fell in love with it, and I'm comfortable in doing so, but I can manipulate it in a way that, that sort of will best interpret or explain what it is that I'm trying to bring across.
Yeah, it's a very primary technique in ceramic, but one that can be developed to incredible sophistication. That's very widely practiced in Africa, specifically, and brought to incredible mastery. I think of people like Ladi Kwali, for example, when I think of the coiled pot from the continent. But there's something that you're doing, and this is a very good example of it, where there's also this kind of breaking or faceting of the surface, so that you're not actually giving a sense of continuity, but rather a sense of disjunction, I might say.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk about that kind of, it's almost like a cubistic aesthetic bringing to the objects.
Yeah, my head is buzzing. That's the thing, because in terms of like, I've got so many ideas, because I've, like where we are, there's so much information that comes in one's way. So I've been in Woodstock, I think now for 2006, I think. So Woodstock is very industrial area, and like a city here in Cape Town. It's beautiful. So my studio, I think 7 or so years ago, was overlooking the harbor. And where you see this industrial skyline, the cranes, and the dockyard and the ship. So I used to illustrate those, because I used to illustrate in the surface of those pieces, right? And then over time, when I was working towards this show, the Tamagu, I was now starting to investigate how I can bring this illustration to 3-dimensional structures. Now, this is what you're seeing here. So those forms that you saw earlier, was really like a way of simplifying these geometric angles that I'm seeing in the skyline of Woodstock, or this industrial style, which is more an urban environment. Yeah. So, and to simplify them in a way that I'm even almost like I'm moving in a dense form, but also using the scarified motif in a much more different way than I used to creating this like sort of like inlay and pushing and pulling of the surface. So that's basically was trying to really way progressing away from the normal illustrations on the surface of the dockyard. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a sense of a kind of cultural passage that arises in the work, perhaps. That sense of the urban landscape as one that's constantly affecting you, maybe? Is that a good way to put it?
Indeed, yeah. So the way that I work, so there's one, I think someone reviewed at some point a while back, said I'm a chameleon artist. What that meant, what that meant, it meant that I come to an environment and I process it, and then I adapt into that, and then when you start seeing my work reflecting some of the environment. And for me, I take that serious because there's no way that I can be in a space having been taught to observe and look and experience. So I mean, I immerse myself into the environment and then see how I can then take the environment itself. So what that does, it makes your work unique because it's your experience, right? And you interpret it in your own words. Yes, we may all be experiencing the same thing, but we've got different perspective. There's certain thing that catches one's eye, and mine is through clay and illustration, and see how I can interpret that and tell the story as to where I am, where I've been, and where I'm going possible.
Yeah. Well, I had to laugh when you said becoming an artist, because I have to ask the question, do you not feel that you were born as an artist? And that idea of where you've been coming from as well as where you are and where you're going? That
yeah, I guess in my language, it becomes a challenge now because I didn't have a word of design or art or anything. That's something, but there's been artists, if we use the English word, I guess, there's been designers because the elders and back then, or the ancestors, were makers of objects that they would use every day. And then you will find there are certain interesting elements which will serve as a way of communicating or expressing, or also as a way of function in the use of the object itself. So I guess I was born as an artist. So the gift, I believe, I take credit that I was given, God, Kamata, is that, but ancestors have passed on this gift to me so I can continue where they left off. So yes, I think I was born as an artist. I am an artist, and I'm an expression, whatever that you want to call it. But I guess the rightful word now would be an artist.
Yeah. So we're now looking at this very powerful exhibition that you mounted at Southern Guild in 2017, which has this very distinctive, well, for starters, the vocabulary is so expansive now, and I think people can see how many ideas there are in the vessels and sculptures. But you also made this very interesting decision to show the work on bricks, on this kind of grid that speaks to me, again, of that idea of an urban architecture.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could, and then we see the drawings on the wall as well, which again, we'll get back to in a moment. But can you talk a little bit about this exhibition and how it marked a moment in your career?
Yeah, it was a very important exhibition, and the reason being is that, so the title was called, or is called still, Izaza being the grain silo. So again, my work reflects my experience, my growing up, my cultural experiences, and everything else, because there's nothing else that I know but what I've experienced, and that's the key. But this was very important because Izaza being a grain silo and coming from the rural Eastern Cape, and that a grain silo is where there's a structure in a home where all the harvest for that season will be stored. And then that means that then the community, the family, and the animals and the livestock will be sort of like nourished for until the next season. And then there will be grain and the seeds for the next, for the next season. So for me, that's my practice. I grew up doing that for good 20 years or so. And so I was paying homage to that, but also because now there's little people or less people that are practicing cultivating the land due to everyone migrating to the city and not depending on buying food and whatnot. But that's just one aspect of it, because there's so much in terms of the grain that were brought into the villages that were genetically modified, which damage the land, which damage, the health of the people themselves. And one would depend on continuous buying. So that's one aspect. Secondly, what I was talking about here is that because of the lack and the lack of that practice of cultivating the land, it meant that the community or the villagers, there's certain practices that are not doing, celebrating the first rains, because that means that I will cultivate the land and put the first seeds, celebrating the harvest and the first harvest. So those rituals were no longer being practiced or celebrated. Now, the language itself, one loses the language, the vocabulary of isiXhosa, meaning there's certain words that the younger generation now are not using because they're not practicing that. They either use emoji or something else, or they, in fact, what they understand is that the word right now, these youngsters, they know it as a crib, meaning like a fancy house, right? Yeah. But now that's totally not a rightful word. It's close because, you know, it's a structure. But when I was saying I was working towards Israel, they thought I was talking about the big house that I'm building. But I meant that I was trying to put the rightful words and the meaning to the words of the course of the language itself, you know, through this work. And in so doing, what I did, most of these pieces, I titled them with certain dishes that we no longer eat because we do not cultivate, because there's seasonal dishes, there's certain kind of grain, there's certain kind of structures, there's certain kind of activities that I've titled some of these pieces because I was trying to document and have these pieces be the silos of my heritage, of my language, so they can, so the next generation can learn about it. And that's my duty, I think. So that's what this body of work was about.
It's such a powerful metaphor, the silo, because it's where sustenance for the community comes from. It's a collective piece of architecture rather than individual.
Yes.
And also, it seems to me like it sort of stands in for this idea of having prepared for the future and being ready for it in some way.
Yes.
And I just speaking for myself, when I look at these objects, I find that they work exactly in that way. They seem, of course, to be they're of course your individual work and your individual expression, but they also have this incredible sense of the accumulated wealth of the community having been brought together into a single object. And I think that maybe helps to explain why they are so potent.
Yes.
So that it's a beautiful description you just gave of what's happening around these objects. I guess I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the change that you're observing, the disappearance of language or the erosion of certain practices, certain foods.
Yeah, it's I mean, I guess, I mean, with the work that I'm currently, you know, the iThongo, for instance, it touched quite a lot about into that. But what I've experienced myself is that having moved to the city, because you are, you know, we're sold the idea that the city, you know, that's where everything is and whatnot. But you realize that you've got so much wealth back at home, beautiful land, and which if you did with the knowledge that I have, that we all collectively have, there's so much that we can do with it. And if we then not sort of jumping into ready-made and, you know, buying things, and but obviously there's a lot of factors that cause that. So I'm fortunate, let's put it this way, that I've been in the city and then I've realized the wealth that we have back at home, from the language itself, the practices, the culture itself, how rich it is, how it is important being part of a bigger community. So, and for me, it's I think I had found that I've been chosen, and I remember the story I would tell, that I am the one who is to bring and restore dignity of the people, of my people. And I'm saying this is not a title I gave this to myself, but the elder spoke, and I've come to witness how that has transformed through what I'm doing, which is I will use clay as a way of, as a language to express that and bring that dignity and remembering and reminding our people as to who we are and what we have done, and all the experiences that I've learned in many places. Then I bring them and say, you know what, we still have everything that we need. We don't need to go anywhere, but we just need to use our resources and the knowledge that we have as well.
Yeah. So here we see this incredible landscape, sublime and transcendent landscape of the Eastern Cape. And you've already been speaking very beautifully about what this place means to you. For those who haven't had the pleasure, like myself, of being there, can you say a little bit about what it's like as a place?
I guess I didn't title what this is, because what this slide is leading us to the Cornish experience. So this is basically the Cornish landscape. So if I maybe I will be talking about that, and yeah, those two, yeah. So that I think I want to highlight what my experience. I think was it last year when I was in Cornwall. Yeah, I think it was. Time is flying so much. But in any case, so this landscape here, I spent 3 months or 2 months, let's say, in practice in Cornwall. And at that time, what I was exploring when I was invited at the Leech Pottery, I was exploring a collection called Indonga. Indonga basically is the dongas, the so almost like the river banks, soil that is eroded that create all these canyon and crevices. So this is a childhood playground in my village, that's like the river banks where I would collect the clay. So when I was doing that, I was really looking at my childhood in retrospect as to what happened when I was in these dongas, when I was playing with clay during that time. So I'm going to explain why. Is that the work that you're going to see going forward, you see there's a lot of torn edges, and that mimicking this almost very similar kind of landscape of the Cornish landscape. And what I was doing is that when I was there, I remember this is a time where now, in looking in retrospect, I think the spirit of my ancestors, as they were grooming me to be this person that I am now, this healer using clay, or this person who bring or restore the cultural heritage of my people as well in the reminder. Because I remember I used to be so much drawn into this clay and these fossilized objects on the walls of the river and collecting clay. And I used to lose myself into this and get into trouble and hearing these echoes, running down the river stream, which we call it Ibizan. And what they were doing is that I feel for me at this stage, it's as if there were whispers of the ancestors and telling me and all these messages and codes, if you wanna call it. And I didn't know anything about it now, but now this is me recalling all of that. Then I was being groomed. So if we move forward in the slides, just to give context of this image that you see here, someone asked me, what was your experience, the best experience in Cornwall? And because I was at Leech, Leech Pottery is like 100 years this year. That's what they said they're celebrating, which is quite amazing. When I got the invitation, I was like, definitely, I'm going. I couldn't say no because I studied about them, and they've got so much influence in ceramic as well. But guess what was so profound, what stood out for me in Cornwall? It was not the ceramics. I've honored the ceramics and the glazes and the clay and way of making, not just traditionally the Leech and the Cornish or the English pottery, but this kind of landscape, the structure that you're seeing here, this Stonehenge, this stone. And why is that important? It's because I could sense the people that erected these stones, people that dance and did rituals of celebration in this land, which is something that I do not have in my home village. Reason being is that this displacement, people moved and land taken away from them.
Yes.
So if you remember what I mentioned to you, that when I grew up, when I was making these clay objects, there was no reference of the traditional beer pots or any other artifacts that my ancestors have made. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So I was not drawing from anything. I was just making clay oxen as I've seen my brothers have seen, because this is what they see in them, this is what they've done themselves. But what I learned here, I realized that the very same people that first perhaps occupied this land, and possibly there's a village under there because it's overgrown, we don't have that. You can't see that because all the structures were demolished. People were put in these camps. So for me, I found home, closer home there, relating to the very first people that understood the celebration of rain, of solstice, the celebration of, the harvest and whatnot. Same thing that my forebears did as well, which they're no longer doing now. Do you see what I'm talking about? So that was very important for me.
Yeah, and we'll see when we get to iThongo a return of this idea of the circle,
Yes.
circle. Very, very powerful resonance.
Indeed.
Before we leave the topic of the Leech pottery, and I'm sure people know Bernard Leech, great Hong Kong born, but then British based ceramic artist and traditionalist, really, a voice of tradition in British art history in the 20th century. And his pottery is still alive and well and running this residency. Can you say a little bit more about the work that you made there and how you were thinking about that specific context for your creativity?
Yeah, so so when I was at Leach, in fact, when I answered to the call and said yes, and it's only because I love doing residencies because they're very important, and I would suggest and recommend that to any artist or any maker, you know, whatever discipline. So yes, fine. But secondly, what I do when I go to residencies, which is what I've done here, is that when I go to a place, I do not go and say, I'm used to working with this clay. Can you organize the exact clay that I'm using in my studio, the kind of firing? So I prefer this or that or anything. I go in. My duty or my intention is to experience the culture, culture not only of the making itself, but culture in overall, everything about the country or about the new environment. So here, my intention was to obviously use local clay as it was used, and use different kind of firings that I've never used. These were gas-fired reduction, and used also the glazes. In fact, so like this is Tamako glaze and some Shino glazes. So again, paying homage to the elders that have gone past. I mean, Leach done amazing in Hamada. So I had to use some of those, but my expression in terms of the form and everything was paying homage to the landscape, which is the Tongas as home, but also the Cornish coastline. And that's really what was this about. But more so and more, that was important as well. So my practice, I mean, this piece is amazing. I can't get over. I mean, I say this myself, you have no idea. It's intense, yeah. So anyways, yo, geez.
Here we really feel the geology of Cornwall in this piece. Yeah,
it was so amazing because again, I didn't know what Cornish. I mean, I've tried to Google it, but being there, it was so powerful that I couldn't wait. This process or these visuals, they couldn't wait 10 years to say I reflect and say, oh, because it was in Cornwall, that's why it's doing this. It was right there and then because I was walking the landscape and like, you know, collecting shards at the back in the river there and embedding them in some of these pieces because that's what they used to do. Some of the shards, they would throw them there. And then I was really trying to immerse myself into really bringing the essence of the collaboration with the environment culturally and otherwise within these pieces. So that's what the essence of the work that was about. I was really paying homage to the landscape, to the culture, to the firing, but basically to everything, but in my own way that I can best interpret that as well.
Yeah, and we feel so much of you in this pot, of course, but also so much of the place. And
Yes,
the way that even the way that the edge has changed, unlike anything else that you had made previously, but also the reality.
Yeah, sorry?
I was just going to ask, when you do these residencies, do you feel like it usually has a permanent effect on your work? Do you carry these things forward with you when you go back to South Africa?
I do actually, and oh, look, this piece in particular, that is very literal illustration of they call it the island in St. Ives. So that little fisherman's house, and then the stairs going down into the ocean. But anyways, answering your question, yes, they do, and I will tell you this because going to the residencies, I like visiting other people's studios, other makers, and that gives me an idea or at least an opportunity to interact and see other makers, how they do their things, and then I can share mine as well. So it's an exchange of energy, of knowledge and language, and being exposed into people who have different resources than I am, but I'm very resourceful as well. So, but it helps to be able to expose yourself in other mediums, perhaps even because it's not only ceramics that I'm interested in. So yes, it has a lasting effect, and for that matter, the Tamago exhibition. That was the first time I've done pieces in that large scale. And I've always wanted, because that was before I came back from, or after I came back from Taipei, where I collaborated with Master Chen, who was making these large scale pieces. So Kamak gave an opportunity for me to practice what I've learned 4 years ago, if you want to call it, you know, in Taipei in a residency, and then put into practice. So do you see what I mean? So yes, it does. So this piece, for instance, if I may say, this was also part of the Indonga or the Indonga collection in Cornwall. What I'm trying to illustrate here also is that drawing and illustration is very much part of my process, because when I'm in my studio, in my space, there's drawing on the floor, on the wall, on any surface that I find, because it's part of my movement in terms of resolving, you know, the I guess be technically or, but there's something about drawing and me seeing these pieces in different angles, but using my, there's a dance, there's movement, there's sound.
Yeah.
So for instance, this piece, the intention of this piece was a totally different form, and leach pottery being very old and wooden floor, and I was dancing and moving, and then it was coming so nicely, and I was trying to learn the clay itself as well. And then it started collapsing, and then it became that. And for me, if I was someone else and I was trying to achieve a certain height and then it dropped down halfway down, and if I was someone else, I would be like, damn, you know, and maybe throw it away. But no, I didn't do that. What I did, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so for me, I want to highlight is that when I'm working, the clay itself has its own push and pull. So I allow the medium and the material to do what it needs to do and then see what you want to do. So it's a conversation, it's a dialogue. And I think that's very important for one to be able to just to let go and be part of the media. Then that's honesty, and there's a uniqueness to the end results at the end of the day. But I think I wanted to highlight, because this is one of my favorite pieces as well, because what it did, it really reflected that landscape in Cornwall itself as well, and then the dancing that I move and that I'm about as well.
Yeah, it's so true about ceramics that it's all about force and acceptance, because you have to,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to really go into it with a lot of
Yeah.
conviction to,
Mm-hmm.
to do
Mm-hmm.
anything. And then
Yeah.
sometimes you have to accept that what it gives you is also true of the
Mm-hmm.
fire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, this piece, yeah. Wow. So I've been, you notice now there's starting to be smoke and everything else, and the traditional outfits and things like that. But this exhibition, this was it last year? I've lost track of time. I think it was last year.
We all have this year, yeah.
Yeah, and no, was it last year? Okay, anyway, either way. But but so this was communion organized by Southern Guild at Southern Guild, and so it was a group show. But what was very important for me about this show also was what Julian and Trevor asked: where are you, Andile, right now? So what can you tell? What stage of your life are you? So we're putting together this exhibition. So maybe we think of names, but this is the time where I was really searching home. When I searching home, or finding myself that I'm home, I really need to go home and answer to the call being honoring my ancestors and what they're asking of me. And as a healer, using clay as a tool to heal and to restore, you know, whatever else that has happened before, but doing that and honoring it now for the next generation. So what's happening, so I made 3 pieces. And the first piece was Embo. Embo is a place far, far back where I believed we all come from, especially as the Xhosas from the black, some of the black people in tribes in South Africa. But what people, now it's a metaphor. When someone says, Masia Embo, let's go back to tearing, if you want to call it. What that means is that let's remember where we come from, the rituals and things that and activities that we used to do. And so when you are called by the ancestors to remember and restore, so they come through to you through dreams in order for you to honor what they bring into the fore. And so this show was very important. So one piece I said was Embo, meaning back in time. And then the other one was, what was it called? Nyulu, meaning purify. And then the third one was meaning the next generation. So what these pieces were about, really. They were about honoring those who came before us. For now, we are here to prepare for the next generation. So whatever that we do today, it is important for the next generation, but remembering where we're coming from. So if you're someone like me who has gift of communicating perhaps with the ancestors or entrusted, then you need to share that knowledge and document it in the best way that you can, so the next generation, my kids, and so as every other person, can benefit in knowing exactly what had happened.
Yeah.
You know, so this show was that important.
And so that is a wonderful preparation to iThongo, and we're going to now get into that subject through drawing. So you've already mentioned the fact that you began by drawing before you were a ceramicist, and that you continue drawing on every surface that lies to hand. The tremendous energy of these drawings as well, and the way that they inform the vessels. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about drawing and then what it has meant for the iThongo project specifically.
Yes. So drawing is like, it's I don't know, you call it a pacifier, because see, I've got a pen here now, I'm probably doodling all over. And this is the kind of pen that I use for my drawings. But what happens is that, so when this vision comes, you know, because that's how it works, is that I've got like vivid vision, like split second kind of visions, which it could be a form, like an already resolved form in my vision. And it happens that if I'm sleeping, or I'm talking to someone, I'm listening to music, or I'm busy with some other piece. But if I'm not in the studio, the only way to let that pressure or that, because I'm like, I start shaking because I have to do this, I have to make this, it has to come out, and then it will come in that sense. So I'll use my sketchbook. I'll start drawing with realistically, and just so I can document it and have it down, right? And it's a way of meditation. So now how that, and when I'm drawing realistically, but also what I've done, I've studied during my university studies. There was an exercise called drawing for design, where they asked us to draw realistically, and then like a still life, and then take the still life and simplify it to maybe 1 or 2 or 3 lines that you cannot even tell it was coming from that still life, whatever pattern that you may be creating, a form or line work. So I've been practicing that. I thought that was quite an amazing exercise, and I found that that was happening. So what happening is that, so throughout all the collections that I've created over time, I will create a symbol for each collection. So it's titled, and then I'll create a symbol, which then I'll create a stamp that will go under that piece. So I'll find myself, well, I've got a couple of collections and I've got all of these symbols. That was quite interesting. And then I started practicing my branchmanship, which I was exposed to when I was in Taiwan, you know, using the ink and Asian brushes.
As we see here, yeah.
Yes, as you can see there. So, and I was starting to practice that. As I was doing that, and I had this like intense visions of symbols, and without knowing what they meant, but I started like putting them down. But as I was doing that, and I started like now having even visions of certain kind of settings, a group of people sitting, doing certain kind of rituals that sometimes I don't even know what they are, or a certain character, you know, in my family or in my community that is known to perform or has been appointed by the community to perform certain duties, which is very important. Only him or that person or her, that person can do that duty. So I realized that what these messages were about, they really needed me to, was basically, I took them as, these are the reminders from my ancestors that I need to document these and create these symbols and then give them this meaning, the names. And then hence I call this kind of glyph uyalezo, meaning messages. And then the exhibition itself is called iThongo, because the messages come through iThongo, which is the dreamscape. Now, if you can please just go back slightly to that picture with, it says Credo Mutua, if you don't mind.
Sorry, yes, sure.
Yes, yes, sorry. So this, so one, you must look up, maybe some people will know. Credo Mutua passed on, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, or early this year. He was a shaman, he was a historian, he was a tribal, he was a Sanuse. He was an artist himself as well. He also wrote this particular book. It's called Indaba My Children, which is about the African folklore, how it was so informative in carrying on generation and communicating. And then you see the signs that you see here. we call them Bantu signs with Spark, which is, this was one other way of communicating before the other writing that we know now. And so we really have learned so much about some of these predictions that is done. So I came across, some of his writing and this, and I remember, I think this had an effect in also in this whole language of symbolism. So that was quite amazing when I learned that. And then if we go to the next slide, again, I mentioned Taiwan, but this picture here, I was in London on my way to Leach. There was an exhibition of Taiwanese, I think it was craft something, but I went to this exhibition. I was so fascinated looking at these glyphs and these characters, because already my head was on that. And I remember Trevor, they went to Japan. I asked them to bring me Japan. Guess what they brought me? These bamboo brushes. And then I was like, I'm going to Leach. I'm going to practice, like my brushmanship. And that's what happened. So I think if you're looking at all of these different sorts of references, you can now see where on your right-hand side, where it led to. Because now I started, these visuals of symbols, they were coming so strongly that while I'm making the clay object, and then there's this visual language of symbolism and everything. And that's what brought us to Uyalezo, meaning the language, and then iThongo being the visual, the stools. Yeah.
So let's, if you don't mind, let's go ahead to the ceramic
Yes,
that have evolved out of this thought process. But just to be clear, the ceramics are based very firmly in these emblems, or pictographs might be another word for them. As you said, a form of writing that has long been established in the Eastern Cape.
Yes.
Word is here. How did the idea of turning them into ceramic objects come to you once you had thought about them as graphic emblems?
Yeah, so it's which is quite amazing, because what happened is, I remember I said, once I start illustrating, then like for instance, there's this other picture where I'm sitting, and then there's all these pictures. So I go in there sort of like a trance for almost a week, and then I'm just painting, I'm doing everything, and the kids start saying, hey, my father is going crazy now. But anyways, so once that is done, so the next thing for me would be thinking in three dimension. So I think the very first, which we don't have to go back to, I started making the symbols, drawing them almost like just 3D objects without knowing what exactly they're going to be.
Yeah.
And then at that time, I was feeling like, okay, I think I've got something to offer. So if I have to do a solo show, then it has to do with something with these symbols. I still don't know what they are, but they're really coming so strong. And I got a call, I think, from Trevin and then Jennifer. They started saying, I think we're ready for your next show. Can you perhaps do stools? If it was any other day, I would have said no, because it has to be, seriously, it has to be something that I need to do, because then in that way, then there's an honest to the work, and I'm expressing myself. But this one particularly, I said yes, because it was one puzzle that was missing. Guess what that is? So if you see the wooden headrests, the small ones, or the neck rests that some of the African tribes that will carry around or sleeping when they're sleeping, what they believe, other than just using them for lying down or sitting down close to the ground is a very important part in our culture, and also communicating with the ancestors, which we bury on the ground. So the sky is not necessarily, we call heavens up in the skies. No, in fact, our heavens is probably underground, because the underworld is key, being that's where we bury our ancestors, and we visit the graveyard. So the way to communicate them is through those stools. They are the portal. So when they said you have to do stools, I was like, that's amazing, because these dreams were coming through so strongly. So if I'm to make stools, it's almost like now I'm completing this whole, I guess, portal, if you want to call it. So hence that. So the decision then I made, I was like, okay, each stool will basically embody each symbol. So it will carry the message of the symbol itself and the energy of the symbol itself. And then I started going insane by creating different kind of tooling that can best explain and interpret on the surface the form. Like I started now from the illustration, so I was trying to create these sort of like embossed effect. So I started using carving lino cut, and you see there's a piece of lino cut where I create embossing, and then I using the lino roller I carved onto some of the symbols so I can roll onto the surfaces as well. So you will see on the detail of the pieces as well. But what was fascinating as well about this work, oh, this image actually is important because just as I was about to start, we hit lockdown, right? And that time is quite hectic in my case because I'm so energetic and I'm like so fueled up to create this work and to let it out. And then I say this work is not for me, it's for everyone to experience. And but these messages are not for me, they're coming through me, right? So when they hit us, so I live in a small apartment, and I had to take some clay, thinking that okay, they said they're gonna lock us down for 21 days. And I thought, okay, I'll start these pieces, and maybe leave them halfway and get into the studio. You have no idea. I was working outside. It was just the beginning of, it was autumn, so going to winter. It started raining and storm and everything. So I was fighting with the elements. Yeah. But the energy that I got just from knowing that I'm really giving birth to these, to these pieces, it was intense. It was so beautiful. My kids were involved and seeing. I was just going insane. So I was so busy during lockdown making these pieces. The energy that I had, I mean, I remember I used to do this sort of like, Instagram live and whatnot, because I felt so much energetic that I needed to share that with everyone who perhaps feeling like, stuck or anything. So that this work really was very important. I think it lends us to say why it even changed instead of going to New York first, but to my home village.
Yeah, okay. So that leads us to the finally to the work. So amazing series of stools which do seem to almost constitute their own language, or kind of physical poem that brings together so many of the themes that you've been talking about, Andile. Yes. So here we are at the conclusion of the talk. Can you speak about the iThongo objects, which are just about to go on view at Southern Guild? They will come to New York to Friedman Benda next year. And yeah, how they seem to you now that you've gone through this incredible journey with them.
I think every time, now that I've seen them at home, or in fact, let's put it this way, I've experienced them here in the studio, because as I've started from my home, at least this way, my apartment, and then to my home, but now, I mean, to my studio. So what you're seeing there, that picture that you just left, which is 5, those are little magnets. Those are like little, sort of like a miniature ones. Yeah. But every time when I was making them, I started creating this circle, because the circle is very important part of structure within our community, because we believe that there's an even flow of energy around the participants, or also the structure within within people where there's an activity. So it's very important. You find it in a lot of cultures as well. But what this was, there's so much experience that happened, or healing, if you want to call it, that happened during the making of the work itself, because every time, so what was happening, the ritual of burning the sage and just cleansing and creating an atmosphere that will help me to really transfer these objects to give them the energy that they need to bring about. Also having people and collaborating with a sound, indigenous sound healer, Kosinati, which there will be sound that you will hear later. Because what was important is that when we do such rituals, there's dance, there's sound. And so for me, it was very important that all one's senses are evoked when he's creating this body of work, or when you're experiencing it as well. The visual language that tells the story of what this is about, because what these images, what these tools are carrying is a way home for me, in a way of restoring what was lost from my community. And because I'm the only one in my community who's creating such work, but I'm not the only one who's capable of doing though. It's only because I've been exposed and I've answered to the call. I've been privileged enough to be able to learn and understand. But my bringing them back home is to say, remember who you are, and remember what you have lost. And the story is I'm going to be very brief. about 10 years ago, I brought a pot to my father. This is my brother that you're seeing here, who was grinding a herb that would be cleansing one of the stools that we will be living in the old village. But what I did, I brought this gift to my father as a way to say, this is what I do in Cape Town, but instead of using these metal or plastic buckets to drink umqombothi when we have our ceremonies, can you use the clay that I've created? What that did, it evoked so much emotion and memories into the elders. And that's where they said to me, your duty in this community or in this country or whatever the case may be, is to restore and bring back and to bring pride in our community. And this is what led to I'm fulfilling and following that journey and that purpose right now. And that was very important, that this healing that is carried and this measure is carried by this work felt and experienced by the very same people that gave birth and raised me and contributed to this person that I am today. And that was the homage to my people.
Yeah, it's very beautiful what you said, that so many people in the community could do this, and then you have had this unique opportunity to do what you have done and to share that with the community and their creative potency. So here we see the stools actually back home.
Yes.
So they made their pilgrimage. What was it like to have them there with your family, with your loved ones?
It was intense. It was so emotional for me, because again, you dream of something. It's like an idea. You have an idea, but then there's the actual making and taking part in the logistics and the making of it. But when I was there, I was like, wow, it's happening, really happening. But okay, that's just me. You don't know what you're doing, how it's going to be received.
Sure.
I had to make like a couple of calls lasting an hour or so with my brother, who is here now, to explain what I'm going to be bringing. And just to find ways to express what I'm trying to do. But when I got there and when the work got there, really, I think the community, the reaction to the work, seeing what it is, I was explaining to them, said, down there, this is exactly the same clay that we all grow up playing with, but can create such things. But it's not about the clay itself, it's about the messages that is carried by these stools and what it's talking about. And the energy of the receiving, how the elders, as they were, the stools were in the kraal or in Kunjen, which is in front of the kraal, like in the yard. The words that they were saying of encouragement and also of pride and also of like finding healing to what they've lost, and knowing that there is one of us in this generation that will help us to carry on, what we've lost. And that was very important, that you see those small beer pots there was a gift to the community to try and ignite that pride and that memory and restore what they've lost, in order for them, because once they start drinking out of one of these beer pots, the conversation changes. The way that they carry themselves, the memory of the songs and the conversation and the smells of some of the artifacts that they no longer have comes to the fore. They visit the trauma of them being forcibly moved, but in a way that they find that there's light, because now there's someone who's trying to heal that trauma through remembering, but also with the hope and carrying the light to move us forward. And that's really what this was about. And I think they received it.
Yeah. And I think here we also, as I mentioned earlier, we see this image of the circle returning, which we talked about in Cornwall and Stonehenge. And so there's also a way in which there's a gathering here. Even when the seats are empty and nobody's sitting in them, you feel like people are there and they're brought into a union.
Yeah. And this was quite, I mean, this particular picture, this were when the stools were being received, and then they're going to be blessed and sort of like, purified, if you want to call it. And then later they will go into this structure on the side, which is the kraal. So, and then that is where people can experience and sit on them. And then we start blessing them and just introducing them, and really for them to carry the cow dung or the manure that's under my feet, but as a way of blessing them. This, for me, I said this to this guy, I said, this was also part of the making of iThongo. So what you will find in the pieces, wherever you see them, you carry them. you will find there will be a bit of the home soil, a bit of umqombothi, the traditional beer that has been spat there, and a bit of some tobacco that an elder was sitting on it. And for me, I think that's just one other way of almost like, it's almost like I was programming them so that when you feel them, then you sense the energy, what they're about. You can feel and the messages, what these pieces were about, you know. And at this time, in this image, that was very important. So one of the things that I was shown was to take one of the stools and take it to the old village, which is the ruins, which that's where we're standing now, where my forebears were buried, were forcibly moved as a way of appeasing them and also of healing the trauma that they've gone through. And but in this way, this particular piece is called Umalusi, which is a shepherd, which is so fitting for within our culture, because the shepherd is a very important person, because what they do, the livestock that one is entrusted, they're entrusted to make sure that it grazes to the greener pastures, because this is the community's wealth. They also entrust that that shepherd will make sure that it multiplies, it prospers. So that shepherd is a metaphor, is for all of us, this generation, to prosper. So the ancestors will find way and healing and peace to sit on this stool and overlooking my homestead or my village right there on the other side, and whisper and keep telling not only me, but my elders, and so as our next generation, what's the next step for us to restore and to heal? Because this is not the only one. There's all of the people that you see there also have their duties, but they just need to understand and be reminded that they can pursue them that as well. So that was the purpose of that story.
Yeah, it's also, of course, touches on your own story, because as you said, when you were a child, you were involved in looking after the flock, the actual.
Indeed, yeah.
There's a very powerful analogy there between your role now as a healer and the shepherd also, you know, this, the burden of looking after a community of which you are a part, that sense of guardianship and healing of trauma, as you've been talking about. Yeah. Well, so many amazing images from this experience. Is there anything you would want to say about the way that?
So this image here, this is now when the family went up the mountain to basically erect and bless the stool. But this is one of my uncles, the elders in our family. So what was happening there, one wouldn't just place that and just leave it, as you know. So it was important that, so what is splashing there, you saw there was a picture of my brother who was grinding in a stone. So those are mixture of herbs. It's called isilawu. So it's a cleansing herb, which cleanse a space, cleanse one's, in order for you to be able to receive whatever messages or whatever healing that there is. If you are a dreamer, then you are. So the use of the herb. So this was part of a ritual of cleansing the space and cleansing the stool and really grounding it so that it can be respected and protected, but also can do the job that it needs to do. So that was an important gathering for all the families. As a result, some people will throw some coins and some tobacco, some seeds, and say their intention, you know, and say what they remember, who they remember, or what they hope for. And that place will be that, because we will, from time to time, go to this space as a family to remember the elders, to remember the traumas, but also it's a way that as a family that unites us, because we see each other once a year, because some people are in the city, some people are in the village. So when we do such ceremonies, then that helps to unite and unify us in a spiritual, other than just a physical, but the ritual that we do, they perform in strengthen the bonds of who we are. And so I think that was a very beautiful shot that explained that, yeah.
Very much so. It connects to what I had in mind to ask you, which is whether you were surprised by any of the ways in which people in the village read the objects, what they felt the symbolism was saying to them, and whether they had associations that you had not anticipated.
Well, because they have, what I can say is that the energy of the gesture itself, they felt it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And as I tried to explain it, I couldn't even go into details because I'll be robbing them of their own experience, of their own reading and receiving their messages if I were to explain what each message or symbol means.
Yes.
The gesture had to be explained as a way of this work is brought here, or this ceremony that brought this work by Andile is to give thanks to the ancestors, is to restore dignity, is to remember them, is to say, we are all here now. We cannot unlearn what we're experiencing now because now we all have to do our best to move forward.
Mm.
They receive that. They ask questions. So what does this mean? What does this mean? Which I tried to explain what it means. I said, now it makes sense. But then I explained, why did I perhaps choose that character? Say, for instance, there's a symbol of iThongo itself, and explain what iThongo is to the very same people that speak the same language, but they don't necessarily practice the way that I do. Yeah. And then I explain what umalusi, the importance of umalusi, because now there's no livestock, so there's less of the shepherds, right? So meaning now one loses. Remember, we spoke about the lack of the practice, you lose your vocabulary and certain rituals in Ijaza. Similar kind of thing. So what this is doing is to bring dignity and restore the rightful meaning and the names of objects and characters and people and rituals that are no longer being practiced, and times of the year and days which govern sometimes what to be done at a certain time. If the moon is at a certain angle or size, this is a good time to pray. Or if it's the time of the year. So the way that I came in was as a way of as a messenger who remind people, then they cannot unlearn this. And I'm hoping that by so doing, and the documentation that and that will continue, will be able to be read by these kids that were running around and climbing on these tools. Now they can continue what this was about.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that this is the beginning of a long story.
I promise you, this for me, I tell you, it's a beginning, and I'm proud to say that I'm not the only one who's in this. English is gone now, but who's in this journey? Let's put it that way, because the young man sitting in the middle here, who Kanyesa song, is an amazing writer, poet, documentarist, and storyteller in multi ways, but is also been called to as a shaman to heal using the skills that he has and whatnot. So he's helped me to find ways to dissect and try to transcribe this symbolism or what iThongo is about. So as part of the catalog and documentation, he has a contribution in that sense. But not only that, but also in a way of bringing all of us into understanding and energy. And then next to him is my wife, Alexis, which is an amazing force. You saw in the beginning, there was someone who was putting a mood board. So I have this conversation with her who's highlighting. So, and then the songwriter and in others. So I'm not the only one who's going through the same thing, but we're all moving using different tooling as like that helps us to remind, restore.
This beautiful image to me is so emblematic of floating above this incredible collection of objects. It's like a sort of divine view.
I mean, I've never thought I would live to see my crawl, which at that perspective, I've always wondered how it looked like. I mean, in fact, I've never wondered, but I never thought I would fly. But in any case, this was amazing. This is really, really amazing because it really tells, it's so powerful how I'm seeing those stools in that crawl and being used, and that pot in the middle of the crawl, because that's the gathering of the ancestors and telling us that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, let's just look at a few last images of the stools themselves, and then we can take a couple of questions. Is that okay, Andile?
Yeah, that would be great. I'm ready if there are any.
Okay. I'll just quickly show these just so people get a sense of what they look like and have these images to take away with them. Again, the exhibition opens at Southern Guild on the 10th, so just in a couple of days. And all I can say is congratulations on this amazing achievement. It's really, you know,
Okay.
something that I think will anchor so many people's experience of your work and the community in so many ways. We have a lot of questions and not a lot of time because we're a little bit
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
But let's see. Why don't I start with a question from my co-host Stephen Burks, who asks,
Mhm.
Andile, it's incredibly inspiring to see how spiritual your work is and deeply tied to your physical connection to the material and making. I wonder if you feel a desire to reach a broader audience with your work to make it available to more people. Can you imagine working at a distance, specifying the design of the work and allowing it to be produced by other means? Just slightly different question, so not hands-on.
Yeah.
So can you talk
Okay.
about the idea of spiritualism and the audience first?
Yeah. So I think I found myself that right now of course, I've kind of like, I think at least, I think I've mastered the actual making of the form because I've chosen the kind of technique, for instance. But that's not the only thing, because like you said, spirituality of my work has to do with the environment. So the movement, the dance, and the sound is very important because I really get myself into the work itself. So I find that the work itself carries so much energy that the next person viewing and experiencing it, will definitely feel that energy. And I've seen this happening where someone come into our shop or see the work and they just burst into tears because there's so much energy that they sense into the piece. And I never know what to make of it. And then I started saying to them that, well, perhaps just take your time. If you need to take the piece with you, well, in exchange with money. But sometimes I'm like, I'll give a piece away because I feel like that piece is a medicine to this person or is a message for them. But yes, what I'm capable of doing, because I know that I'm capable of doing really anything, I am able, and I am obviously very much willing to work with any other medium or any other, or let go of this information, because that helps me not to go insane. So I can be able to have other people produce it in a different medium. But I like my involvement. I'm a very tactile. My father was a maker of things. So it's difficult for me to not, for instance, when I work on a body of work like this, I do it alone. So just so you know. Then if there's a sub-product that comes out of that, then a production system, then I will create, because we have apprentices and people that are helping us in the studio. Then they can make other aspects of it. But this is a personal and spiritual. So I have to go through this journey myself, but share the energy of it and after. Because there's a lot of resolving of certain technicalities, but also because I don't know sometimes where I'm going. I just led by the spirit of the energy of the work as well.
Okay, thank you. A simple question, but I think maybe quite a profound one, from Christina Panchik, who asks, what is the significance of red and blue in the designs? Could you talk about color and symbolism in the work?
Yes, so there's important colors that we traditionally that we relate to, that we sort of, for instance, red being is very symbolizes the blood that we all have as people, but also the energy and the power and the fire that we carry within the context of my culture, at least as I understand. And so I find myself drawn using a lot of red for some reason because of that. And also the red, we've got many tones of red. So this was another challenge when I went to art school, where I was either told to, I don't know, identify red, because we've got red, brown, red, but we call it we just call it bomvu, but it's in many tones, like from the soil and whatnot. So there's a connection with the red itself within the soil where I come from, but also the colors of the animals and everything. So that's one aspect. And then the blue aspect is, the blue is a symbol, the blue color is a symbol of the water and tranquility and peace. So you will find in some of the beadwork and the colors, people will use blue. And then the white being then white, so represent purity and cleanliness. And then that, for instance, if you are in a training of being shamanism, you will find that they will cover yourself with white clay and white clothes as a way of you starting afresh, so you can receive more basically like you die and then to receive more, to be born again, like blossoming, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Much more to say about that, I sense, but that gives us a flavor of
Yeah,
what.
that's since all the time.
I'll just ask you two more questions. The first one is, it's a really interesting question from Mario Ballesteros, who is our colleague in Mexico City. And I think we could talk about this a lot, but he says he had a chance to visit Cape Town earlier this year and visited your workshop with Sisypho Poswa. So he's met you. And he says, my mind was blown, I can imagine. And says, I would love to know how you see the relationship between traditional craft and, quote, high art or design in a place like South Africa. Is it a natural or uneasy relationship, especially in such a socially, economically, and racially divided context?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because you know, when I was studying, I think I remember this whole, I think it happens everywhere where there's this thing of crafter, designer, and the fine artist, and you know, like all of these things. And for me, I don't differentiate out of all of these things. The work that I do, some may say that is not accessible based on the pricing, or perhaps where it is, I guess, platformed. But what I was trying to do now is to say that anyone from any walk of life can experience any high art, if you want to call it, or any, you know, and that's one thing, right? But for me, coming back to, I mean, I may be answering the question or not, but I don't know. But coming back to the fact that one would say craft and design, and then there's like sort of like a hierarchy in all of these disciplines. But for me, when I see a beautiful piece of art that may have beautiful narrative, but I'm first drawn by the craftsmanship to start with. Secondly, then it will be then the narrative. And then the rest, I guess, is the energy of the work and where and how it's presented. And that's just me. So all of these sub-disciplines, they all need each other. You understand? So there isn't any division. But about the accessibility and of one's work within the wider community, that I don't necessarily have control of, but the control that I have is to dictate as to what my work and how it's shown and where it's shown and who is to experience it as well. I think by this particular show, that exhibition offering that we're talking about, it was very imperative that the very same people that are struggling through this whole hard time, yes, in the city and everywhere, the people in my village, they're struggling even more, but they need that activity, that energy, upliftment, it was needed through this work. So it's a gesture, it's a message, it's a challenge, and that's what it is. So I'm hoping I've answered the question.
Great, yeah, okay. And I'll finish with one last question. Again, it seems a simple one, but I think it's actually a nice one to end on. It's from Bel Faleros, who asks, would you talk about the firing process and the transformation from clay to ceramic matter? And
yes.
It's a nice one because I think transformation is what we've been talking about the whole time. So could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I will find myself these days not even sort of talk more about the technical aspect of the making of the clay, but of course we can go there and I can go in deep. But here we go. For me, it's even if it's in a raw state, it still carry the energy of the process.
Yeah.
Right. So the material itself, clay, just in its raw state. Why? Again, I'm very spiritual, so I'll always go there, because when I touch clay, this is, if you see where the clay, so if you see where you find clay, especially in the riverbanks, it's far below. And my brother even said, think about it. You are consulting and invoking the ancestors that are sleeping. So by touching them, you are actually saying, talk to me, speak to me, use me, take these energies. So that's one aspect. It's in its raw state. So that's why this is where I'm playing right now. I may end up not firing my clay. Secondly, I enjoy different kind of firings where I can, in terms of the technical aspect of it, you know, creating these objects that I can create all of these different textures and forms and illusion, if you may. because sometimes I would create pieces that you would think that is made out of many layers, but it's not. So there's certain techniques and carvings that goes into that. So when I do that, then already I am thinking of possible glazes or not glazes, but just what sort of effects and textures and that can bring and enhance that. So in this case, I have access to electric firing. So I use electric in the city. But anytime when I get an opportunity to use a different firing, like I was in Cornwall, I would totally explore that because it's going to give me a different texture, like the what do you call it, temperature of firing and the environment as well in the atmosphere. So I'm very open to any other. I'm hoping I'm answering one's question as well, but my method really is electric firing. So these pieces themselves, they were coiled, hand coiled, and what else? And then electric fired. And then I use brush on glazes and oxides. So these are made out of terracotta clay, very highly grown terracotta clay. I think they use it for bricks. And then the choice of that clay specifically was based that structurally it can carry the weight of these pieces, and they're quite heavy. So that because they are based on the stools that you will find in the rondavels that are attached onto the walls, but this one can move as well. So we call it soza, meaning never. You can never move this because attached to to the wall. So there's a bit of that as well that plays within the finishing and the thinking of what it is that I may make as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Andile, that was a very informative answer, but it also contained in it so much because you began by talking about the ancestors sleeping in the riverbed, and then brought us to the electric kiln in Cape Town, and then back again. And
yeah.
it's just an incredible experience to listen to you and to experience your work at a distance. And I hope some people will be able to experience it in person very soon. I look forward to seeing it in New York and seeing you in person. I will just briefly announce that Steven Burks, my co-host, will be welcoming Iwan Ban, the Dutch photographer, to our program Design and Dialogue on Friday. Ban is very well known for images showing how people interact with architectural environments. So we're as often expanding the dialogue here by looking at other disciplines besides design narrowly conceived. And certainly that has been the case today because you have taken us to vast realms of thought, spirituality, and power. So all I can say, Andile, is thank you. It's been wonderful. And
thank you.
I wish the best to you and your family, your friends, both in Cape Town and at home. I hope everyone stays very safe and thrives under the benevolent influence of your work.
Yes. No, thank you so much for having me, and I hope that everyone sort of shaken and please do process, and hope to see you soon. And yeah, so if anyone wants to know and learn more, you can always try and reach me wherever in many ways that one. So I'll try. But thank you so much. Sure.